Alright, guys. Oh, little Paulster got a little lucky here. He got himself an advanced screening to the movie Babylon, the new Damien Chazelle movie. My friend, editor of the channel, Jackie, he got himself 2 tickets to go see Babylon in advance. Damien Chazelle was there. The man himself was there. He did a Q&A after the movie. It was a fun time. Damien Chazelle, director of hit movies Whiplash and La La Land. A lot of people forget that he made the movie First Man. People kind of dismissed First Man as being your stereotypical biopic. It was pretty good, First Man. I went in a little skeptical, but I ended up enjoying it. But yeah, now I'm watching this movie, Babylon. Like I said, director did a Q&A, and the interviewer asked Damien Chazelle, has his vision of Hollywood changed ever since his stardom? You know, because he was the new kid on the block when he did La La Land, and La La Land is a love poem to Hollywood, and this here feels a lot more cynical and a lot more critical of Hollywood. To which Damien Chazelle replied that this is a love letter to film, but not a love letter to Hollywood. It's actually quite critical of Hollywood. Movie follows basically, I would say, 4 storylines, if you want to call it that. First storyline involves Margot Robbie. She's this starlet who comes from New Jersey. She got the New Jersey accent. She's very crass and rude, and she wants to become the next big star. Obviously, her mannerisms aren't in line with those that old Hollywood would expect. Meanwhile, you have Brad Pitt, who's a silent movie star, and he's trying to make the transition to sound pictures, and he can't quite make that jump. His voice acting is a little poor. You have this Spanish character who's from Spain. He moves to America, and he hopes to become a Hollywood producer and keeps working towards that goal. And finally, you have the story of a jazz trumpetist who encounters a lot of racism in the Hollywood industry. Wow, what a big fucking storyline is this? Well, the movie is 3 hours and 15 minutes. Does it merit the runtime? Well, we'll see about it. I will say, Damien Chazelle, when it comes to cinematography, always on point. When it comes to music, always on point. This movie did something pretty interesting. I think it might just be a me thing, but the music was very similar to La La Land. Especially the City of Stars song. I feel like it gets kind of played in a different kind of way in this movie. But it's kind of played on this old out-of-tune piano, and it kind of has that sound to it. This is called an old out-of-tune piano, but obviously the big dance sequences that you see in the trailer, those are bombastic and horns and jazz of the era, and it really works in this movie. I think the music is what steals the show in this, especially. And Damien Chazelle said that himself, that whenever he writes a movie, the first thing that comes to his mind is, what's the music gonna be? Everything is technically good. The movie is technically good. Just like La La Land was technically good. Just like First Man was technically good, and just like Whiplash was technically good, this movie is technically good. That said, it's a fucking mess of a movie. Yeah, it's a mess of a movie. There's no denying it. And it wants to be a mess of a movie. You see, Whiplash and La La Land are very structurally solid. Those are tight scripts. And this, just not a tight script. It's just not a tight script. And I don't think Damien Chazelle wanted to make a tight script with this, because it's about the bombastic nature of Hollywood in the 1920s. Therefore, it would make a lot more sense to have a plot that's all over the place, jumbled, and giving you whiplash everywhere you look. That said, for 3 hours of that, you kind of get a headache, and you kind of want some kind of through line, just something to grasp after a while. Tonally, it's so inconsistent. Very tonally inconsistent movie. But again, I feel like Damien Chazelle wanted to go for that. The movie goes from showing very sad depictions of racism in the 1920s to fucking Ace Ventura style gross out comedy to fucking orgy sequences. It turns into a horror movie halfway through the movie. It fucking goes all over the place. At times, this movie is La Dolce Vita. At times, this movie is Caligula. At times, this movie is Singing in the Rain. At times, this movie is Cinema Paradiso. So many things crammed into this fucking 3-hour runtime. 3-hour and 15-minute runtime. And I don't mind a tonally inconsistent movie. It's not something that bothers me all that much. What really bothered me more were, 1, the characters, and 2, the plot. The tonal inconsistency was kind of entertaining to me. It's one of the reasons why I keep gravitating towards Spider-Man 3. You go from a very gothic emo thing to Peter Parker dancing in the street. I don't mind tonal inconsistency at the end of the day, but character, this movie really suffers. Brad Pitt in this movie is Brad Pitt. That's his character. Margot Robbie is Harley Quinn. She's doing the same shtick she did in the past 3 Suicide Squad movies, Birds of Prey, whatever they call those. And then the 2 new-coming actors, the trumpet player and the Spanish man who wants to become a producer, I don't feel like they were given much to chew on. I don't feel like there was much to their character. Especially the Spanish actor. Unfortunately, I feel like his performance was a little underwhelming. He kind of has this Wolf of Wall Street arc where he starts off as the innocent, wide-eyed person who's about to enter this industry and make a lot of money. But I never bought him as this very straightforward producer. When he made that switch, I kind of didn't buy it. The film is so unfocused that it kind of forgets about its characters. It's more entertained by showing its set pieces, showing some funny moments, some gross out comedy, some orgies. It kind of just forgets about the characters. There's this really devastating moment in this movie where the Spanish producer is face to face with the jazz trumpetist. And the Spanish producer is forced to, I'm trying not to spoil the movie here, but he's forced to make the black man do an act that's very shameful to his race. And you just wait for that kind of drama. That scene was so poignant. And it just cuts away and you're like, no, give me this. Go back to this. This was so good. This was so poignant. Go back to this. And I feel like this movie over relies on a trope. It over relies on the trope of like having this big bombastic cut to silence. It over relied on that so heavily. The first few times that happened in the movie, the audience laughed because it was funny going from this big extravagant moment to this very quiet moment. And then after a while, it kind of became over reliant on that. That's what I mean. This movie needed another editor. It needed another editor just to cut those repetitive moments out. There's a moment also in this movie where there's a big cameo that I'm not going to spoil. And if you don't want it to get spoiled, don't go on IMDb because they will spoil the cameo. I didn't see it coming. It came out of left field. It actually entertained me. But during that cameo scene, the character is with a bodyguard. And the bodyguard is played by the guy from My Name is Earl. And he does this thing where he does... which is funny the first 3 times he does it. But I think the movie must have shown him do that maybe 8 times. I'm not exaggerating. There's just so much repetition in this movie. And speaking of repetition, like I said, this movie borrows heavily from Singing in the Rain. There's a solid 20-minute scene in this movie that's pulled straight from Singing in the Rain. And I was like, why am I rewatching Singing in the Rain? I could just watch Singing in the Rain. And at the end of the movie, they do a reference to Singing in the Rain and they call back on that scene. And I get what he was trying to do. But in the moment, I was rewatching Singing in the Rain. And I was getting really frustrated. I was like, why am I watching Singing in the Rain in the middle of this movie? It tries to hit so much. Tries to talk about sexism in the film industry. But it doesn't really dive into it as deep as, say, a movie like Blonde that came out just the other month. It tries to have a statement about safe sets, but I just watched the movie Pleasure, which is about the porn industry, but it does have a theme of safe sets, and I feel like it did it a lot better. This movie tries to be about the transition from silent film into talkies, but we got Singing in the Rain, which is an all-time classic film. So it just covers so much ground and ends up not covering anything, and it just ends up being a very bombastic, loud mess. And the ending. We need to talk about that ending. Whew, that is an ending. Probably one of the worst endings I've seen in a long, long, long time. For the longest time, I used to say, I think Black Klansman has the worst ending I've seen in recent years. This one takes the cake. This, like, makes Black Klansman's ending look better. I was so unimpressed with this ending. It was so... And you think of Whiplash. Whiplash ended with that scene. It was so beautiful. And then La La Land ended with that scene where we see what could have happened and what did end up happening. And that was beautiful in its own right. Even the First Man movie ends with him on the moon throwing the necklace. That was a beautiful moment. This movie ends and it's just like... It felt like an ad. It didn't feel like a real thing. It felt like an advertisement. I don't want to spoil it, but that's what it feels like. It felt like an ad. The ending was pure Black Klansman meets Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Like, if you take the two endings of those movies, put them into one, that's what you get with this movie. But that said, like, there are some really interesting things in this movie. There's so many flaws in this movie, but when I was in the theater watching this movie, I was watching a train wreck. But not just any train wreck. It was a train wreck where it slowly crashes into a building and one limb goes flying and the other limb goes flying and everyone's burning in a fiery mess. But I can't help but fucking watch, and you're like, oh my god, what is going on? Oh god, what the... And I will say there's a couple of moments in here I was really... Again, that cameo sequence where it kind of turns into a horror movie all of a sudden. You're like, holy shit, okay, I wasn't expecting to go down this route. It kind of reminded me a bit of Boogie Nights, how they had Alfred Molina. It's like that kind of role in the movie. And then there's like some beautiful cinematography sequences. The party sequences, although redundant, are really fun to watch. I can't help but respect Damien Chazelle for trying to do something outside the box. He was playing it safe a bit with First Man, and I think he kind of knew that, so he decided to just swing for the fences, and I think ultimately he missed. I don't think people are gonna like this movie. I don't even know if I like this movie. I don't think I'll ever see it again, but it is fascinating in its own right. It's like a beautiful disaster. Beautiful disaster, run down the street. Yeah, it's just such a weird movie. And when I walked out of the theater, I was with my friend Jackie, and we were both just like wordless. Like, it was pretentious, but it was weird, but it was entertaining, but it was like, it's such a mess of a movie. It's such a mess. But hot damn, it was a hot mess. Alright, that's my review. Take care, guys.